so much, everyone, for coming. Today, I have a very important guest. She's Tamara, the CEO of Grantmakers Association in the United States of America. And she really talks a lot about climate reparation, renewable energy. And I think it's a very important issue to talk about because when we talk about climate change, it's a global reality. The waves are differ just as the pandemic has shown to waste in trying to provide solutions, because everywhere now is now being impacted by the climate change crisis. What are the progress that we have recorded so far? What do we need to do that we are not doing yet? Why do we have slow progress when the climate change crisis is moving in an arithmetic progression? So all of this is she's going to be telling a video for the International for World Environment Day, to quickly introduce herself to us, and then we go into the question properly. Thank you so much, Tamara, for coming, for honoring my invitation. I really humbled.
Well, thanks for having me. My name's Tamara Toles O Laughlin, and among other things, I'm the CEO and president of the Environmental Grantmakers Association and the founder of Climate Critical Earth. It has been 20 plus years that I've been on this journey, and I'm glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. She wears several caps on her head, like she has been playing different roles, in the climate justice movement, in Black movement, to trying to see that we all get support, we become visible, for the climate justice movement. And so just to get on with our first question, looking at the biggest disruption towards meeting climate targets, what could be those biggest disruptions towards meeting our climate targets? Because we have different targets like the Paris Agreement, the nationally determined contributions. We have several of them. What could be the disruption to all of these targets? Because right now we have submitted or updated our nationally determined contributions after 5 years, but then the progress is zero or little. What do you think are those biggest disruptions that we need to look out, that we need to improve on in going forward, to see that we try to solve the defining issue of our time, which is climate change? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest impediments to our success on these issues has been a lack of tangible goods. I think we have a lot of great talking points. We have incredible spokespeople. We have data that goes back many decades about what's happening and what will happen. What we have are also stagnant relationships with our governments at the local level, at the municipal level, at the state level, at the global governance level. We talk big game and we don't do enough to make it happen. We have targets. You mentioned the Paris Climate Accords, which are fantastic, except that they do not deal with the #1 driver of emissions outside of the built environment, which is fossil fuel gas, flagging that we're in the context of multiple conflicts happening across the world for land, for space, and for energy. We don't have a government that recognizes the level threat that climate change is, and then develops global governance relationships at places like the COP, where everybody takes these determined contributions. The focus on net zero instead of zero emissions, of tampering down on a schedule the things that we know are causing harm. One of the things I'm a big champion of, and many folks across the world is the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. One, because it focuses on the gaps that are inside of these global agreements, where people agree to ramp down their use of coal, oil, and gas on a schedule that means people get to survive on a habitable planet. So I would say that it isn't a lack of great targets. It isn't a lack of campaigning. It's a lack of decision making in the time that we have, by people whose job it is to do what preserves life, and instead they're going after profit or continuing to keep the status quo, rather than aggressively seeking a combination of strategies that allow us to pull down emissions in favor of people and planet.
Yeah, definitely. You've mentioned quite a lot of things, talking about decision making. that this is the time we have to make those decisions, that we can't wait, because I've been seeing world leaders making commitment of 2050, 2060, thereabouts, and then the vulnerability keeps increasing. The climate crisis is not waiting for anyone. So if we keep making long-term commitments, then definitely we can achieve carbon neutrality by that 2050. Because if we must achieve anything, it all have to start from today. How much more are we investing in it? And so I really understand. And you mentioned about fossil fuel, which is my next question, that what are the strategies we need to deploy when it comes to phasing out renewable sources of energy? Because right now that is what we need to see that we try to stabilize our environment with renewable sources of energy that could help, that is affordable and efficient enough. So what are those strategies that we need to defeat the fossil fuel industry?
Well, one, we need to recognize who's driving the upward emissions and who's driving the use of energy. And I would say that I think for North America, for what is called the global north, there's so much more that can be done to ramp down emissions. The continent of Africa and the 55 plus countries in it are not historically responsible for more than 4% of emissions anywhere. And so that means so many people in so many different contexts across so many different countries on an entire continent are suffering the immediate consequences, not in 2030, not in 2040, not in 2050, but today. The diaspora is suffering today because of the appetite of the global north to continue consuming at a rate that makes the planet uninhabitable, whether that's ramping down on coal, which was a positive that happened at the last COP. People recognized that the role of coal should be none. But here we are in the middle of a world conflict and people are reconsidering putting it back on the table before we've ever actually done anything to ramp down coal to avoid security issues, as though climate isn't a threat to security. So I think really being honest about the timetable that it will take, the gargantuan or huge amount of ramping down of emissions and where that will happen, we become folks who are less focused on regional relationships or where people are located and more focused on a term I'm interested in about called the carbon elite. People who have access to increasing emissions by virtue of the ways that they live their life that cost entire other sections of the planet an inability to stabilize and to increase renewable energy. And so we are in a global conversation that involves many folks who have been thinking about the role of place and people of energy for a planet that is habitable. And it is time for us to put the things that we know do not serve people and planet on a schedule to end, and we ramp up at the very same time access to solar and wind and geothermal and hydro where necessary. We really have to become much more thoughtful about the technologies that we employ, the investments that we make, the agreements, the role of nuclear. There's so much to say about all of these items because we are no longer in a theoretical conversation about the climate crisis. We're experiencing it now.
Yeah, thank you so much. You mentioned about COP, when there were some terms that were used of facing down fossil fuel rather than facing it out, because definitely it's a crisis that is defining us. And so we need to kick them out, trying to make profits over the people. So that is very dangerous right now to see that we are out of this crisis, because the bulk of the emissions we have, it's affecting us. And then planting more trees is a solution then. But then I still want to ask you a question just before I ask a concluding question. Talking about carbon credits, what do you think about carbon credits or carbon trading, when the ones that are not emit? Do you think it is, or do you think it's just hypocrisy, or they're just trying to deny climate change? Or what do you think about those terms?
Well, I think that people who really care about this disagree. I think that there are differences between cap and trade between cap and invest, the idea of creating market-based solutions or technological solutions, as opposed to doing what we know will be 100% effective, which is ramping down our use of fossil fuels. So I think that in a conversation around markets, we have to be very careful that we don't put a profit motive over people, that we don't say to ourselves, if we can just figure out how to make money doing the same thing, we will somehow magically, with magical thinking, reach a habitable planet. So there are no market-based solutions that allow us to continue polluting at the rate that we have been. There are no real solutions that keep things the same. We have to radically shift our reliance on what is killing the planet, on coal, oil, and gas. We have to radically shift that. There are no mechanisms left by which we can do that fast enough to meet the need of the scale of the problem. People have talked about a carbon tax. People have talked about offsets. At the Environmental Grantmakers Association, we stopped counting offsets mostly because we think that amongst the strategies that are most useful, it is not a valid one for the time we're in. If we had 10 more years, 20 more years to focus on ramping down emissions for a habitable planet, then some of these mechanisms and the markets that might support them would be useful. But people are being pushed out of their homes today by fire, by flood, by extreme weather events, by exposure to heat and toxic wastes and from industry. Those things are happening now. The setup for a market that will make it profitable for people to change, I would argue that the time has passed. So great ideas 30 years ago, solid ideas 50 years ago, not so great when we're trying to put the human race into a lifeboat to save ourselves for a future that we would like to enjoy. So all tools are good. They're only as valuable as the implementer. And so rather than saying that an offset is foolish, we could just say an offset isn't timely. Rather than saying a tax is foolish, a tax isn't timely unless it closes a plant that's killing people, unless it closes a mine that is killing people. So the question of tools is about what we want to build. And if what we want to build is a habitable planet, we don't have any more time to play with industry. It's time to move forward.
Yeah, I love the way you put it, market-based approach or mechanism, So trying to use that means to see that they are trying to still make profits, because definitely they are trying to look for loopholes to make profits. Because when you pollute here and then you are looking for ways, imagine, because the rise of emissions is just like a goose that it's not trade mechanism, just as you just elaborated it, or we continue, which is going to lead us to a bigger problem. So it's just a decision for us to make, just as you mentioned earlier, that is a decision that we need to make, and we don't have any option than to stop it, or else we face more vulnerability. And this time, everyone will be impacted, the impact of the climate change crisis. And just to ask this concluding question, I know you're a big fan of when it comes to climate reparations.
I am.
So I want to know, yeah, I'm always seeing you being fascinated when it talks about climate reparation. And these are terms that big polluters doesn't want to hear. They don't want to pay, but yet they want to keep polluting. And so definitely it's affecting us. And so, without climate finance, there is no way climate action can be completed. And also, without climate finance, loss and damage becomes inevitable because they are inside the climate reparations. So, what do you think about it? How do we make this possible? How do we make these people to pay for what they have done? Because sometimes they buy their way out. They try to build themselves out because they have the money to do that. So happy to hear from you.
Well, I think interestingly enough, this last COP in Glasgow, loss and damage came up again, because like fossil fuel nonproliferation, we have to start moving the mechanisms for a just transition. We can't just keep asking for it. We can't just keep demanding it. We can't just need it. We have to start implementing it. The idea of reparations, or money for care and repair, money to retreat, money to adapt, money to recognize that mitigation efforts will only do so much, and to give people a chance at survival, are a thing that government should be delivering because the governments are supported by the people who need it. So the idea that we should have to force a global conversation around the harm of climate change when there are very clear people who have made a business and a profit from causing this problem, it is good business everywhere to make sure that your liabilities are covered. And if your liability is the whole planet, your business is too expensive to continue. So I would say that the conversation around loss and damage and climate reparations isn't just one for campaigners and for academics, but for global governments to start to consider the harm of continuing on this trajectory when all of the science tells us that it's unsustainable.
Yeah, thank you so very much for that insightful contribution, because yeah, it's a term that came out in COP26 that those big polluters shied away from, so we have lots to do, and the climate justice movement needs more people, because just as the theme says of this World Environment Day, that it's our only earth. We have to protect it with whatever it takes, you know and we have seen many people coming out, activists, bringing out different campaigns, advocacy to champion different cause of climate solutions. And so we need to make this happen, that the climate crisis, that nobody bears the burden of the climate change crisis. And we can't wait. We can't wait for 2050 or thereabouts, because it's just like shifting the responsibility to the younger generation. So thank you so much, Tamara, for coming. Despite your busy schedules, you could still make this interview happen. I really appreciate you. And I know you have valuable contributions, but just because we are keeping it below 30 minutes interview, I know you have lots more to do. And so I'm going to put our details below when it's going to be live on our YouTube channel, so that you could further engage with her.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Happy World Environment Day. And I cannot imagine that we aren't on the right track when we have conversations like these. So thank you.